Terrific. Hi.
Yeah. So, hi, Lisa. I was just introducing you. I was saying, you're a mom, you're a nationally syndicated columnist, and you're also the author of How to Raise Perfectly Imperfect Kids. And so I'm super excited to have you on our Q&A live. We're changing it up a little bit because typically we host clinical specialists from different
Hmm.
backgrounds, but I think your insights from essentially gleaning what families are going through during the pandemic will be really, really useful for a Q&A session. So how it
I
works
hope
is
so.
for anyone joining, you just drop your comments in, and thank you for joining, Alexander. I'll be monitoring the chat, and then we'll just host Lisa's story in terms of, how you got started and what
Sure.
made you so passionate about helping change up the parenting conversation.
Yeah, that's great. Um, what would you like to know first?
So I know your book, How to Raise Perfectly Imperfect Kids, really changes the paradigm about perfect parenting. And
Yeah.
kind of, I'd love to hear your story and like what inspired that for you.
Yeah, sure. This is my third book. I've written a couple of other parenting books. I also write a nationally syndicated humor column called It Is What It Is, and that came before everything. So back maybe 10 or so years ago when I was in the thick of it with my kids. My oldest is 23 now, my youngest is 20. So, I've been at it for a while as a mom. And, I was in the school system for many, many years and I had this incredible lens through which I could look at the family dynamic and the family system and the way kids were interacting with their parents and with the world and where people were kind of getting stuck. I just had a really great bird's eye view of that because I was working with parents and educators and students and staff, and people were so wrapped around the axle. I mean, when I started writing, I was writing about everything. My column is like a random stream of consciousness. I could be writing about hockey one day, I could be writing about work-life balance and fitness and and marriage. And I just like started slowly switching lanes. And it was because of my experience as a mom, as a working mom,
Mm.
and an educator that I just really dialed in pretty directly to what was going on within the family unit and how stressed kids were getting and parents were getting
Mm.
by this notion, this myth, whatever you want to call it, that we need to be perfect, that parents need to nail it, that your kid needs to be, the D1 athlete and in all AP classes and taking five languages by the time they're in the third grade. It's not sustainable, it's not realistic. And
Yeah.
people were so fixated on that mentality that they weren't living their lives to their own capacity. Do you know what I mean? They
Yeah.
they were trying so hard to do what seemed right when they were looking at everybody else around them, but they weren't paying attention to what was working in their family and what was working for their kids and what how does your kid learn? Maybe your
Yeah.
child will crush it in CP1 classes because that's where their capabilities lie. But kids were under so much pressure, and I used to see so much working in the school administration. Just kids were cracking and
Yeah.
breaking, and so were parents. So it just inspired me to write a lot more about parenting. And then my columns led to one book and led to another book and led to another book, and I just felt like nobody was actually endorsing the fact that it's okay to screw up, that
Right.
it's necessary to screw up. And so that was really just the kind of the genesis for the whole book.
I love that you've sort of taken this huge paradigm shift, right? Where it's like you saw that people were being sort of like plastic in their approach to feeling like this
Hmm.
is how things should be. And I think even with like standardized testing, like your your metric for like measuring somebody's ability to learn is so skewed just to one area, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
so it's
absolutely.
not dynamic to the actual child or to the family unit as well. And so by making it okay and like opening up a conversation about like the mistakes have to be made
Hmm.
and like being having an approach where like you're accepting and almost embracing them and seeing how you can learn from them rather than wallowing in shame and guilt, I think is such a beautiful thing that especially I think is necessary at this time when total like work-life balance has shifted, right?
Oh, for
So I don't
sure.
know what
Yeah.
the pandemic has looked like for you or how that's changed kind of like your home life and your work life. Would you be willing to share about that? And if not
Oh,
with
sure.
you, then just like even some people like that you've talked to and that you've started writing about their stories.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, I feel like in some strange way, my husband and I talk about this all the time. So I work for myself. I'm a writer. I work from home. And my husband has worked in an industry where he's worked for 20 years from home. So it's
Mhm.
almost in this crazy way like we've been training for this whole situation for the last 20 years because we get up every morning together, go out for a run, come home. He goes downstairs to his office, I go upstairs to my office, and we do our thing. And so it wasn't terribly difficult to make that shift for us. I know it's so difficult, and I've had so many conversations in the last 5+ months with parents who have been trying to not only navigate the that work-life balance by working at home when they're used to traveling or being in an office, but have had so many conversations with people who are trying to get their minds around, or who were when the shift happened, trying to get their minds around how do you do that and also educate your kids at home
Mhm.
without any training. So many of us who are our parents are, even those of us who are at home parents, and I was at home with my kids for a long time before I went back to work. I'm not a trained educator in that way. So that was huge. We kind of dodged that bullet because our kids were, my oldest is out of college. My youngest is in between programs right now.
Mhm.
So we didn't have to deal with that. We didn't have little kids running around and trying to do Zoom calls and trying to teach lessons. But still, I mean, it's hard. I mean, there's so many other ways that this whole situation is impacting people. I have family in Florida. My husband's family is away in Florida.
Oh, which
Mine
part?
is,
I'm
oh,
from
we've got,
Tampa.
oh, you're kidding. Oh, my
Yeah.
sister-in-law moved from Tampa to Miami just fairly recently.
Mhm.
And my in-laws are in Delray Beach and my parents are in Lake Worth. So they're all kind of clustered in the same place. They're all pretty close together, which is great for them.
Right.
But we're really close with our family, and it's been really tough to not be with them. You know,
Mhm.
I, I've had older kids who had couldn't work. Both my children were working, and then that
Mhm.
just completely shut down.
Right.
So they've been home, and you picture, I don't know what's worse, dealing with young kids that don't really understand what's
Yeah.
happening as much as your older kids do, or dealing with the older kids who just like want to get in the car and want to go off and be with their friends, and have significant others and want to be with them, and it is definitely tricky. So we've had to navigate all that just like everybody else has. And there have definitely been highs and lows, and thank God both my girls have their own bedroom, because I think somebody would have killed somebody by now if they didn't.
Yeah.
But I mean, overall, I feel like we've been really pretty lucky. We've tried to take the opportunity to enjoy this time that we have together, because as close as we are as a family, when are
Mhm.
you ever in the house like this with your grown children,
Yeah.
morning, noon, and night like that? And we're very fortunate that we have a really close relationship with our kids. But we've just really tried to embrace where we are right now, and take this as an opportunity to be together
Yeah.
and spend time together. And that's how we've been looking at it.
And I really like that you touched. Thank you so much for sharing, like, what your personal parenting in the pandemic experience looked like. And I'm happy we could touch on different parts of the spectrum of parenting, whether it be like typically we talk about, perinatal situation, like
Hmm.
brand new baby, but even into like you have adult children all of a sudden coming back into the family unit. And this is not
Yeah.
uncommon. And it in like the COVID-19 situation. And so it's really what I'm hearing you say, that same fundamental principle is helping you through that experience that you
Hmm.
wrote about and How to Raise Perfectly Imperfect Children, which was like embracing sort of I think
Yeah.
it's coming back to that because you were talking about, embracing mistakes or like what is not really standard societal norm. And then
Hmm.
even with this new change in environment and in like family unit and structure and who's constantly around you. Thank you guys so much for joining. I just want to remind you, you can jump any comments into the chat here, and I'm monitoring them. We're with Lisa Sugarman. She is an author, a mom, and a nationally syndicated columnist, an expert on parenting. And so I thought it would be perfect to have her here because this is a totally unprecedented parenting challenge. Like where we are at in the world with technology as it stands, with education as it stands. And so I just wanted to have her on board here because I think you're a world of insight.
Well, thanks.
And
I appreciate that. And if there wasn't an example of, perfectly imperfect situation, man, this whole situation that we're in is about as perfectly imperfect as you can get. And we don't have a choice. Like we don't
yeah,
have a choice when colleges and universities close down, when businesses shut down, when airlines shut down, like you have no choice but to roll with that. And so I think
mm-hmm.
that being able to give your kids that skill set to be able to know how to pivot when they need to pivot is one of the greatest things that you can do for your kids as a parent. And
Yeah.
that's where we are right now.
And that's an excellent, I just want to like recap what I'm hearing from that. So being able to one, embrace where you are and see how you can learn from it, whether it be a mistake or whether it be a new challenging environment and situation, such as all the family living together in one space, but also like modeling how you are working together and essentially, you know, being okay with not knowing how to handle things and being transparent about that. So like you can learn together as a family unit, I think.
You
Is that
can, and I
kind of
and I yeah, it's absolutely, you're nailing it. I mean, it's look, the bottom line about parenting is that as soon as you get your feet on solid ground as a mom or as a dad, as soon as that happens, there's going to be a seismic shift. That's the one thing that you can always guarantee is going to happen as a parent, is that as soon as you've got it completely figured out, everything changes. Everything changes. Your child goes from grammar school to middle school, or middle school to high school, or high school to college, or graduates. And um, as soon as you can handle them being off and riding their bike around the neighborhood alone, then they're getting in a car and doing it alone. Then, I mean, everything is constantly changing. So we do have a lot of experience, all of us, in learning how to pivot, because nature just, it necessitates that we have to do that. That's
yeah.
that's just growing up with children and parenting children. But I think the most important thing, you said an interesting word a few minutes ago. You talked about transparency, and I think that is one of the most important things, that most important assets that you can have, along with good communication and flexibility as a parent. Because if you're not open and honest, like for instance, and transparency in terms of fears,
Mm-hmm.
like this is a scary situation. I mean, this has been a really scary situation, and to ignore that and not to deal with that, and
Mm-hmm.
to let those fears and those worries and those doubts and concerns fester in your kids and pretend like it's not happening, is
Yeah.
that's detrimental. But when you have that, that open line of communication, and you can sit with your kids and be like, look, I'm scared. And obviously you do it in an age appropriate way. You're not going to sit your 4-year-old down and say, wow, I'm really, really scared right now, because
Yeah.
now you've just traumatized now you've just traumatized your kids. Is that better or worse if I do that?
I
By the
think
way,
it's
I'm just
better.
noticing.
Yeah, that's
Was it
good.
better? I just
Where
want to
I'm
make sure
sitting
that you
is
can see
just
me, okay?
super bright.
Yeah, no, yours is like great, and I've got all this crazy sunlight behind me. So, I mean, the fact is that the more open and honest we can all be with our kids in a situation like this, that is so completely imperfect and so unpredictable, I think the
Mm-hmm.
better off everybody is. And we've had really open and honest dialogues with our girls about all of this. Like, should you go back to work? Should you, move out? I have my older daughter is actually moving. We live in the suburbs of Boston, and she's about 20 miles away from Boston, and she's actually moving into the city um,
Mm-hmm.
in 2 weeks. And we talked very realistically about that situation and what the concerns are. And I have another daughter who wants to go back to her college program, and that's on hold. So we're having these conversations, and they know that we're afraid of certain things, and we know that they're afraid of certain things, and that's how you navigate through
Yeah.
that, by just owning those issues and and working through them together. So that's
Yeah,
what we've tried to do.
absolutely. I think that's beautiful advice, like, about the honesty first with yourself and then by applying it through transparency so you can open up that line of communication. And you said it very well, like in an age appropriate manner, right? But I think
Hmm.
I think it's so important, and I'm here as like your host and a very curious not parent because um
What did you
I,
say? Not parent?
I'm not a parent myself, but I'm very, very passionate about providing resources, for new families at this time
Hmm.
and making sure that they are supported primarily through their breastfeeding journey, but also like these skills that you're talking about are transferable. So like you said, it's a continuum of parenting. At any
That's right.
age, you're
You never
applying
stop
this.
being a parent.
Yeah, exactly. And so, by applying honesty through transparency in an age appropriate way, you can really navigate together. And I think almost strengthen these family bonds because what's more detrimental, in my opinion, is plastering over the reality that you're all going through, because that models a behavior that it's unsafe to be honest about your emotions, that
Hmm.
it's not okay to feel afraid or uncertain. And this really fosters an environment where you can um, learn from each other and glean like the support within the unit that you need. Um, is there is there experiences that you've had or that other people have written to you about? Because transparency is really important, but what if you're on the other side of the spectrum and like you're suddenly becoming just like an emotional dumping zone for someone and you're inside the same house? I think we should just touch on, how do you also set good boundaries in parenting? Um, do you have any insights around that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I definitely have opinions. I don't know if you want to consider the opinions insights, or wisdoms, but I mean, it's hard because especially as a parent, you want so badly for your children to feel like they can come to you and they can talk to you and they can share with you and they can confide in you. And that's all you ever want. So I know that when either one of our girls comes to us and confides in us and is open and honest with us, like, we consider that to be a gift, because not every parent and child have that relationship. And we're
Mhm.
very, very fortunate to have it. But I mean, yeah, you can definitely run into situations where your kids are oversharing and kind of leaning in a little bit too hard. And I guess the only thing I can say is that you really kind of pick your battles as a parent in
Mhm.
general, and I think you do that as well with those lines of communication. You
Yeah.
have to establish those boundaries, um, because you also need your kids to think and act for themselves. And if you're
Mhm.
always there, it's one thing to let your kids dump their stuff on you. I mean, that's what we're
Mhm.
there for. They're supposed to do that. But I think the line that we have to walk as parents is that we don't then dive in and act as the
Mhm.
ones that are solving everything, that are fixing everything, that are coming up
Yeah.
with solutions for everything, because that's enablement. And that makes
Yeah.
it really difficult for our kids to then be able to navigate on their own when they're out from under your roof and they're on their own. And even if they're younger kids and
Mhm.
they're at school and they can't advocate for themselves because you're the one advocating, you're the one dealing with all their stressors and their conflict instead of
Mhm.
letting them. So it's I think totally appropriate and great to have kids sharing. But then what we have to do is then teach them, give them those skills to allow them to then deal with their stuff and
Yeah,
understand how to, how to arrive at solutions on their own, or
that's
source other solutions for themselves.
that is such an excellent point. And I didn't even think that we would like go from, yeah, how do you set good boundaries to actually like modeling critically thinking for yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
also, like, as a parent, sometimes it can feel really good, I imagine, to like just put on this superhero cape role and like always
Oh
jump to the
yeah.
rescue. But something that comes to my mind, it was I was this was not this summer, but I was in like some national parks, and there was a young boy. He was maybe like 12 with his little brother who was like 7, and they're trying to learn how to like hike up this more precarious trail. And the older brother stops and says, "I'm helping him by not helping him." And I thought
Yep.
that that was
Yep.
so profound. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there's there's situations where someone's in dire need, obviously, like but I thought that that was great because he was like, no, he needs to learn. He needs to learn for himself how to think, how to
Mm-hmm.
physically move his body and like scale this trail.
Yeah,
And
that's
I
right.
was like, I just thought that was so wise coming from a young child. And I was like,
Yeah,
I think back to that all the time. I'm helping him by not helping
by not
him.
helping them. Well, it's funny because so in this book that I wrote, the most recent one, we talk a lot about the power that can be found in letting your kids drive the bus for
Mm-hmm.
themselves. Because without that, they have absolutely no concept of how to handle situations, handle rejection, handle sadness or despair or anger, or they don't understand how to move through those emotions because they haven't had the experience. We talk an awful lot. So I my co-author and I did something a little different with this most recent book, and I brought in a friend actually. My friend Deborah Gansenberg, she's a licensed psychotherapist here in Boston. She has a really big practice here in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
And she came in to give kind of the clinical sidebars to everything that I talk about in the book, kind of my soccer mom perspective. And then she backs it all up with that. And she's also the person who I co-host our radio show, Life Unfiltered, with. We talk a ton about the importance, the necessity of letting your kids fall, letting your kids, we use the tree analogy, like climbing out of a tree, climbing up a tree, not that you want to have your kids falling out of trees, but it's something that people can connect with. Like, you don't understand how high you can go. Maybe you don't understand just how far you can travel on your own unless
Mm-hmm.
you've hit a bunch of bumps and you've learned how to get yourself up and how to keep going forward. It's that creating resiliency in
Mm-hmm.
kids. And the only way to do that is by saying, here, do the thing. Do the thing, make the decision, and know that if you screw it up and there's a bad outcome, but
Right.
I definitely am not going to make the decisions for you.
Right. Absolutely. And being there as like a springboard, like that's where that embrace transparency process comes in. And like maybe like even probing the question, okay, how do you want to handle this? Like,
Mm-hmm.
like maybe just helping them come up with their own blueprint, just like sparking that critical thinking, but very, very much, like you said, giving them the ownership and making
Right.
sure that they feel the responsibility or the consequences of their choices, because
Right.
otherwise that could, if you're not cultivating that resiliency, if you're not helping them by not helping them, over helping them.
Yeah.
That can be so much more detrimental
Yeah,
down the line.
you're hurting your kids. Like we talk an awful lot about helicopter parenting and bulldozer parenting and unicorn parenting, and there are all these different types of parenting models. And
What's unicorn parenting?
unicorn parenting is something we actually did a radio show on unicorn parenting. It's really kind of like this hybrid. It's like you're you're upbeat, you're happy, you're allowing your kids to have some freedom, you're encouraging them, but you're not hovering, and it's just kind of a nice, I think it's, I guess if I had to identify myself as something, I would say I'm a unicorn parent because I'm supportive of my kids. I try to be happy as often as I can be, but there's still the reality that we can't always be all the time. It's not always like rainbows and sunshine, but you really do kind of try and um, embrace that part of life as much as you can, and then kind of give your kids wings, the whole goal is to give your kids wings to let them, I mean, I know it's a kooky cliche, but so they can use them. Well, if you don't let them use them, they have no idea what they're doing. They're going to jump out of this little nest that we all live in, and they're going to
Yeah,
fall flat on their face.
yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah, but we talk about that, and about the bulldozer parenting that goes on in this world. And I mean, I saw so much of it. That was like a really big impetus for me writing these books, because it was all about how parents are just swooping in, and they're either hovering as helicopter parents over their kids, or they're lawn mowing this, super clear path, no obstacles. Kids have no challenges because everything's been kind of neatly wrapped up with a bow, and they don't have any conflict, so they have no concept of how to deal with
Yeah.
conflict. So and we talk about how damaging that can be, because I've seen the other side of that. I've watched kids who have grown up that way then become adults and then go off into their own life, and they're completely paralyzed. Like they completely fall apart and have a breakdown if they don't get a job, or if they didn't get into the college they wanted, or the D1 sport team didn't pick them up, or I mean, or if a relationship doesn't work out.
Mhm.
It's not doing anybody, let alone our kids, any service to